Have you ever wondered how to get out of fight or flight mode? If you are in that place, it can seem potentially impossible for how to get out of it. But today we are going to be talking with Michelle Riddle, who is a pediatric occupational therapist and registered nutritionist as well. So my name is Veronica. It's a pleasure to have you here on ADHD What Now? And I'm actually going to pass it over to Michelle to introduce herself. She has an amazing expertise, and one of the things that I loved that she did was the Kids Brain Summit, which I watched and participated in and loved. And I know she offers it a few times a year, but we'll get there at the end. In the meantime, Michelle, can you just start by introducing yourself? And then I'm going to ask you about why you're so passionate about this.
Okay. Well, hello. And as Veronica said, my name is Michelle Riddle. I'm an occupational therapist and registered holistic nutritionist. And I have a couple of businesses as well. I am an instructor at Vancouver Island University. And I also have a community alliance as an advisor with the neurology program at the University of Alberta. I have Resilient Health, which is my private practice. And I also am the founder of the Global Alliance for Our Children's Future. And I've been working in rehabilitation services for more than 25 years. And my goal is really to empower mental, physical, and emotional health of humans. And predominantly now the focus is for our children, because we're seeing, really big changes in our world, and that's impacting outcomes for our kids. And I have the honor of working with some amazing professionals collaborating to bring forward strategies that can both prevent or reverse symptoms associated with many of these chronic neurodevelopmental challenges.
So what have you seen and observed in terms of chronic developmental challenges?
Yeah, well, there's some really provocative numbers that are out there, and we don't hear about them too much. So autism has increased from in the year 2000, 1 in 10,000 kids to now 1 in 36 boys. That's really significant. The numbers of kids who have ADHD in North America are running towards 1 in 6 kids. The numbers are increasing. They're more than 50% of our kids now have some kind of a neurodevelopmental condition, and that's continuing to rise. And it's not because more kids are there's more opportunity for diagnosis. It's actually less. I'm from Canada, and we have funding that are associated with many of these conditions, and with that, it means that the criteria for diagnosis are becoming much more stringent as well. So the numbers truly are increasing, and if you talk to any teacher, they're certainly going to tell you that is true, because they're seeing this in the classroom, especially with the kids who are challenged with maintaining their attention, with being able to stay on track, with being able to manage their emotions.
Mm-hmm. And so how are you looking to counteract that?
Yeah, and this is a really exciting part about what I'm doing, because it's so simple, we've missed it, but because of the way our society is, it isn't that simple anymore. So the World Health Organization in 2011 and again in 2019, as well as both the American and the Canadian Pediatric Societies, have all identified, along with many other mainstream medical organizations, that the chemicals that we put into our air, our water, our soil, our food, they have impact on humans, and especially our kids. And so what we're seeing is that when that level builds up, bodies become anxious. And I'll give you a bit of a background in terms of how our body works. So our body is designed to protect ourselves. So if there is a stressor, if there is something that's scary, if there is something that doesn't belong in our body, the brain has a an inflammatory reaction. The brain has a fight or flight reaction. It's stress-based, it's cortisol-based, it's adrenaline-based. And if it's a lion that jumps out in front of us, we need to run away fast, right? Or we need to hide. It's that fight or flight reaction. Well, our brain doesn't know if it's the lion or if it's a bunch of chemicals that they can't deal with, or, the body is always trying to clean out, to create balance, to keep us safe. And it's a good system as long as we're working that system in a natural environment. And I'll give you an example of when, say we're walking down the street in a city. So we're smelling exhaust from the cars, and now there's a construction project going on over here, and there's paint fumes, and somebody's, drilling on the cement, and there's all these particulates in the air. And then we stop at the vendor on the sidewalk, and we have that hot dog that has preservatives and pesticides and herbicides and fillers and flavor enhancers and sugars. And all of these things are not naturally meant to be in the body. And so with each and every one of those exposures, the body launches an immune reaction. It says, hey, that doesn't belong there. I need to send a whole bunch of cells out to manage this. And that system is managed from our cortisol release system. It's actually the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So it's a brain gut connection, and the body launches this immune reaction. Well, what comes with that is anxiety, is that, I need to do something right now. And that reaction is great if that something can be dealt with in the moment. If that something can be either run away from, hidden from, cleaned out immediately, that's great. And it works super well. But when these exposures are continuous, when these exposures are cumulative, the body is constantly in that fight or flight mode, and it becomes hyper acute to any of these things that come in, because it's always trying to get rid of this problem, and the problem never ends. It's always, always, always coming in. So what we found is that that's what the cause or a big cause of these challenges for our kids are that there's all of these reactants coming in, and it could be stressors in the environment. It could be something that's coming in from toxins or reactants from the air, the water, the food. Could be coming from an environment that's too busy, or an environment that has stressors within it. It could be coming from a viral load inside the body. There's many, many places that this can come from. What we found is that when we lower the reactants and we increase all the great things that the body needs, then the stress load reduces. The allostatic load gets less, and these bodies are able to cope. These bodies are able to think through next steps. And the things that we put in are, of course, stress management. We put in an environment for capacity, so making sure that what the kids are doing is meaningful, is calming, has components of connection in that. We make sure that we're nourishing the mind, body, and microbiome, because are these tiny little organisms that live in, on, and around us, and there's more of them than us, are responsible for building neurotransmitters and B vitamins, which help us to be calm, which help us to focus. They're a part of our dopaminergic system, which means we can focus our attention. And so we look at that. We look at sleep. And an interesting thing with sleep is that when we've studied sleep deprivation, the symptoms are very, very similar, in fact, almost identical to ADHD. And I work with a really great team of doctors, and they have this prescription pad that has a bunch of lifestyle factors on it. So it has the stress management and the food and the sleep and the exercise. And they go through that first before they look at any further diagnosis. Because if sleep deprivation and ADHD are identical in terms of symptomology, maybe if the child can get better sleep, these symptoms will go away. And again, we see that. And there's lots of lifestyle strategies that can really help in each of these areas. The other thing that's really, really great is that I offer what's called the sense of regulation program. And again, that's the stress management, the environment, nourish, sleep, and exercise. And when we bring that forward to families, there's a lot of places that they can take a look at to make a difference, to lower that load. So when they present or when we present the program to the families, they get a chance to choose what feels right for them. They don't have to bite off all of it at once. Maybe sleep's the priority. Maybe it's more exercise. Maybe it's that stress reduction. Maybe it's love and connection. And so they can pick the area that they feel, that there's the most meaning for them. And by, again, lowering that load, any of these areas count. Any of these areas make a difference. And as that allostatic load is lowered, their resilience for these kids really improves and the symptoms go away.
I love that model that you're talking about, because it's up to the individual family then, or to pick what's applicable to them and their child and what works for both of them, right?
Yeah, and it's been lovely over the last many years to be able to work with thousands of families with this kind of a model, because once we get into it, everybody always finds that there's kind of something in all of these areas that they can tweak. They also find that there are things that they really rock, that they're doing well within each of these areas. And so it's as well as looking at, what can we change? What can we do a bit differently? What can we tweak? It's also a celebration of what's working out. And that's really nice as well, because for so many of these parents, I mean, their loads are really big too. We're all living in the same world. We all have the same busyness going on. We're all being exposed to these chemicals, and the reactions don't just happen in our kids. And the flip side of that is that they actually, a lot of them come from genetic susceptibilities, that this has been passed on through the generations. And a really clear example would be something like type 2 diabetes. So if a child is born with the risk factors for type 2 diabetes, what they do in their life, whether they exercise and eat healthy food, or whether they're sedentary and they don't eat healthy food, will impact whether or not that disease comes forward in adulthood. And it's the same with so many of these symptoms. And so when we're able to identify the risk factors that exist for these kids, we can really target in the lifestyle factors that minimize those risks, that help to prevent the onset or to even reverse the symptoms that they're experiencing.
For us, in terms of symptoms, I mean, there's lots of qualifiers for different diagnoses in terms of sensory processing, expressive receptive language delays. I suspect that I probably could have gotten an ODD diagnosis if I had gone that direction, and ADHD. But with the nutritional support, right, it was amazing. Within 3 weeks, there was a substantial improvement, because we've been homeschooling this year due to COVID. So whereas we spent half of the year with me trying to chase him down, come to lessons, come to school, come to whatever, now he's like, hey mom, look, I'm gonna go do this assignment, and look, he's like actually read books,
Yeah.
Whereas before, that was a battle before, just to have his body calm down to the point of enjoying a story and reading a story. And now he's finished 4 or 5 books, I think.
Yeah.
So it's substantial.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that kind of opportunity for him to be his best self is huge, right? We haven't given enough credence to the fact that these tiny little chemicals, all of these little processes that happen in our body, change every single function in our body. Right. And if we were imagining running a gas vehicle on diesel, if we were imagining running an electric vehicle on gas, it's not going to work very well. Right. We need the right fuel. When we think about our pets, if there's something wrong with a pet and we take it to the vet, well, what do they eat? How much do they exercise? Those are the first 2 questions that you get. Right. When we do it with humans, we've got away from that. And our bodies run on the natural whole ingredients that we bring in. and in concert with what's happening with our microorganisms that live in and on and around us. So looking at that system, the root of what's going on, it is so helpful. And I love the story that you have, because the change happens quickly. As soon as you find that balance, the difference is night and day, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's amazing. And you must love it and be driven. Maybe this is part of the reason you're so highly driven, is because you have such a wealth of stories similar to that, right? Like you get to see it all the time, the
I
change
see it
coming
all the
up.
time. Yeah. And it is so truly amazing to see it all the time. I have a story. We're seeing all of these different specialists. Well, within 4 days of taking sugar out of her diet and taking gluten out of her diet, she's level. And they're like, holy smokes, is it really this simple? I'm like, yeah, it really is. But it was hard for them to do that previously because they didn't have the genetic information. And when they got the genetic information, what it said is that both parents had sensitivities for gluten and difficulties metabolizing sugars. So every single child in that family is going to have those challenges as well. And so when they looked at that as a family perspective, they all identified that we have these cravings, and this is where we go to with our food, and this is why we're, and again, they were highly motivated with that because this little girl was so aggressive. And yeah, so those kinds of stories are fantastic.
That is amazing. Now that's from the nutrigenomic testing. And do you do that for the kids and then the parents as well, it sounds like?
No, I'm just, well, I could, if the families want it. But what it says, it provides you with information on whether or not you got the genetic component from one or from two parents. They don't say which one
No,
it is. And so that testing does identify whether it's heterozygous or homozygous, coming in terms of your predisposition for this. And so that gives the family information, right? So it's really helpful in that way. Yeah.
You're talking about lifestyle too. How do you think that our culture has changed in terms of movement as well? Has there been an impact in that area also?
Oh, significantly. So each one of those factors are very, very important. Now, Maslow has a hierarchy of needs. And when we look at the foundational pieces, we have physiological needs, and that's the need for air, for water, for food, for safety and security, for the capacity to move our bodies and to sleep. So these foundational pieces are necessary for our bodies to work that they need to work. And exercise is huge for many reasons. Number one, exercise stimulates sleep. So if we move enough during the day, we're going to sleep better at night, especially if we move outside. And movement also helps to clean out some of these toxins. So we have a couple of mechanisms of cleaning the garbage out. And one of the mechanisms is, of course, circulation and sweating. So if we exercise and we sweat, we're getting rid of a lot of that garbage. We're lowering that load, and that stress goes down. Exercise itself releases endorphins, which make us feel good. When we feel good, we can't feel bad. When we use our brain and body together, when we move in space, we develop so many different skills. We can practice skills that are necessary for us to feel calm and secure. I work with many, many kids who have diagnoses of ADHD. And with that diagnosis, many of these kids move all the time. And when I do assessment with them, it's because they have no core stability. They're moving all the time because their vestibular system needs to fire more, that system is underactive. Well, when that system's not working, the eyes don't work well, the ears don't work well. So in a classroom, they're not processing information well. And so if we can use movement to build those skills, if we can use movement even in a classroom, so sitting on perhaps a wobble board or something like that, it improves their ability to process information. So it's huge. As well, the last piece about the exercise is that we have a system called lymphatics. And this is, again, a detoxifying system. But the only way it works is if our muscles contract against it. So it gathers up all the garbage all the way around, but we have to move to keep that garbage being transported out of our body. So again, it really lowers that load that their kids have to bear.
Awesome. I'm thinking about this idea of fight or flight mode, and does it start at a certain point perhaps, or can kids kind of be born into this point? I'm thinking about my own child, and I feel like he came out primed to be in fight or flight mode. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, and again, we look at genetic predisposition. We also look at whole, maternal experience and what's going on during the pregnancy. So there may be different physiological things that happen with mom. There is a very strong link between maternal inflammation and ADHD. So there is a link there that sits together. For our kids as well. There was a study that was done at Toronto General Hospital Toronto Children's Hospital. And what they found there, they looked at the cord blood of newborns, and this was in 2013, so it'll be more now, but on average, there was 121 toxins in the cord blood of newborns. So they're not even making it into the world before they're being bathed in these toxins, right? So yes, being born, most of these kids you'll find have some form of sensory challenge or colic or irritability, difficulty settling, only settle with one person, only settle when you've got that rocking motion going on, right? And looking at that from infancy, and it really shows that this is the starting place for that. So being able to look at a family system and ways that the system itself, again, can start to lower that load. Because if you lower inflammation in mom, then the chances of these things coming forward in babe are less, right?
It's amazing what a big picture you have of the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
You said that you talk to or you work with an amazing team of professionals who go through and look at all of these potential, not red flags, but like, what's the right word? Areas or indications like sleep, are they getting this? All of those
Factors,
to cross those influences off the table first. Do you think that's common in practices across the board, or is that kind of unusual and hard to find?
I think it's growing. I think that we have been looking at this for long enough now, that our medical system has to change, and they know that. So we're looking at a shift in paradigm, and a really good example of that is our Canadian food guide. It's shifted in 2019 from one that had dairy, bread and cereals, those were the main food groups that were sitting on there, right? It had a glass of milk that you were to drink all the time, right? Well, now it's changed to this beautiful whole food plate, and it gives lifestyle factors. So the picture of it is this beautiful plate that is all whole food that you can identify, right? So it's fruits and vegetables, it is good protein, it is grain, and you drink water. Right. So, and then it gives you ideas on sitting together as a family. And, so that it takes a lot to bring forward governmental change. So that's happening, and we see things like those prescription pads that are in doctors' offices. And it's not everybody that's changed yet. Change takes time. But and we look at our grocery stores, the ability to buy really low toxin, especially things like cleaners or shampoos, body care products, whole foods, that's growing. And I remember when we first started a number of years ago, there were some communities that we had to bring our food because just to find something organic, it's not going to happen, right? And now you can. You really truly can. And we toured. We're doing a documentary film, and we did the filming of it a couple of years ago, and we toured North America to do it. And we were into some very very rural areas, and we could always find really great, clean, whole food, chemical-free whole food. So that's changing on a global perspective. I think we also look at the whole idea of food security. And for a lot of these kids who have things like ADHD, they self-select. They become very picky eaters. And part of the idea of food security is that we need to be able to offer both the right and the opportunity for all of our kids to have access to chemical-free whole food. And that, again, that's a big movement. We're looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That fits right in line with that. So we're changing, and we're in the middle of that change. So it's exciting.
First of all, I love it. And I'm so excited about that. And I thank you for highlighting that we are in flux, because then it's a nice message in the sense that there are places you can go to get this type of information and support, right? And it's moving in a good direction. Then going back to the idea of fight or flight mode. So let me see if I have this right, and you can tell me. In order to reduce the fight or flight mode that ends up becoming ingrained into our bodies due to chemical exposure or the lifestyle with maybe lack of exercise because we have computers and so there's less movement involved there. And then sleep, which is harder when you're staring at screens all day. If your kid has been doing remote schooling, for example, for the past year, in order to do that, there are many different options in order to begin to lower the stress hormone or the stress cortisol that's going on. Is that right? Can you give us, and you cover all of that inside of your sense course.
That's right. Yeah. And so we really look at, we start with, the most, something that has the most bang for the buck. So we look at air. Right. And the most common stress reduction method is deep breathing. So we look at, what, number one, is the child able to breathe properly? And if they are they breathing air that's clean? How much airflow is there? Do we need more plants? Do we need some kind of a filtration system? If there's somewhere they can open more windows to get that circulation, that's a really great idea. Can we use deep breathing as a first step? So if we see that child is ramping up, can we teach them the deep breathing? So there's all kinds of layers. So we can do stuff with the world around us, and it's all interrelated, right? And something as simple as, and really fun for the kids, is adding sounds to the deep breathing. So it could be a bee breath or a wolf breath. So a bee breath would be just breathe in and then bzzz. Well, physiologically, you've got that air coming in, so the brain relaxes. That's great. You also, with that vibration, are turning on your vagal nervous system. So you expand the rib cage, you have pressure in there from that deep breath. And then with that vibration through your rib cage with the sound, it stimulates the vagus nerve, which causes relaxation, which enhances focus of attention, right? So each of the factors that we look at has multiple layers to it, and helping families to understand these multiple layers gives them a really big toolbox. So it's not just one thing that you have to do based on the behavior, but there's a lot of science that goes back in behind the deeper levels. And when you're looking at the root causes, again, you have a lot more bang for your buck.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Can you share a story of a child or family that you have seen this transformation? Like, what was their life like beforehand, and what was their life like after they have implemented these types of stress reduction techniques?
Yeah, and I have many. I have one though that is a really neat story, and I actually in some of the courses that I teach, I show a video of him. But I met him when he was probably about 2, and he needed 2 people to support him into preschool or daycare. He had no level of awareness of anybody else around him. So if he had an impulse, he was on it. So maybe it was climbing up that shelf unit, maybe it was running running over top of the kids. Maybe it was getting into something that's super dangerous. If it wasn't working out for him, he was frustrated. He would throw things. He would kick. He would, he really required that huge amount of support. And what this family did is they looked at all of the different factors, and they looked at, the stress management. Well, the mom had so much going on, so she changed some lifestyle factors. They started to harness hormones by really connecting well together. They implemented an environment for capacity. So they looked at, again, how much airflow. He had asthma. Being able to get better air all the time was super helpful for him. So having windows open more often, getting outside more often. He needed to move his body, but he didn't have the control to know where he was. And so that created stress for him. And that created a desire in his body to keep moving all the time because he's trying to find that balance. So we implemented some exercises that were helpful for him. They changed their diet, and they made sure that, and he was on screens at age 2-ish. They stopped all that, and they within, for him, it was a period of probably about over a year's worth of time, making all of these changes step by step based on what felt right for them. But each change they made, they noticed differences and improvements. And again, within that year's worth of time, he required no more support. He was able to focus just fine. And he started kindergarten without assistance at all in a French immersion class. So it was challenging. It was a big class. And again, he was one of the kids who really was able to focus so well with everything. And I have lots of stories like that. So
that's amazing. So
it is amazing.
Your documentary that you are working on is called Mission Possible.
That's right.
Is that what this is all about?
Yeah, it really is, because by again following these lifestyle, by lowering that toxic load, by adding in all the things that our bodies naturally need. Like if we think about ourselves several hundred years ago, as a species, we were outside all the time. We were moving our bodies all the time. We were eating only whole, chemical-free foods. We were connecting with our group well because we had to for survival. And when we look at that model was able to sustain humanity for millennia without ongoing chronic diseases, with kids who were curious, with kids who were engaged, but kids who were able to follow and focus and learn and grow. And that's changing drastically, and especially over the last 80 years. So it's not too late to undo it. And that's what the whole goal is that this mission really is possible. And with we did a clinical study, and we found that on average, the functional changes that we saw in these kids was about 40% improvement. So that's really significant. And that brings so many of these kids from a space where they really are finding each day super hard. There are many factors that create anxiety and irritability and difficulty with focusing and learning, to one where they are independent, where they're relaxed, where they're confident, and where they can learn and grow in a way that makes sense for them.
Mm-hmm. As we're wrapping up this conversation, is there something else that you would like to share with parents?
Yeah, so just really looking at getting back to basics. I think that's the main focus. And we've got the Kids Brain Summit coming up again in the fall. So it's free from October 20th to the 24th, and that's at www.kidsbrainsummit.com. And you can register for that now if you're interested in it. But we also have the Global Alliance for Our Children's Future, and that's www.ocf.global. And there's a bunch of freebies there. There's activities on connection. There's anti-inflammatory diets. There's exercise. There's links to all kinds of professionals that are working in this field. So that there's a lot of free information there for the taking. And I'm hopeful that families will really be interested in just seeing step by step what they can do. It's not a magic wand, because we live in a culture where this stuff is still happening. It's still difficult to make some of these changes, but every one of us can make one change today that matters. So we can take a deep breath, or we can open a window, right? Drink a bit more water, right? There's a few things, and that's the lovely part about this.
Mm-hmm. There's two things I really appreciate about what you're saying here is one, it can still be done because sometimes it can feel, I know when I was first getting into this, it was beginning to feel like overwhelming, like there's so much coming at me and I, but to know that each little part matters, right? And that there are actions that are as simple as the breathing and getting the oxygen and just the cumulative effect that it is possible. So I love that title of your documentary, Mission Possible. And I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us here today and the work that you're doing between university and educating the public through documentaries and providing education for families available through online. Thank you very much for your time and all of your work.
Well, thank you for yours and for having this platform for people to engage with, because it's so important.
Happy to be a part of spreading the message. I know
You.
you are. So thank you. And bye-bye. We'll talk to you later.